Hello and welcome. I'm Melanie Ross, and I will be the facilitator of the webinar today. Our presenter is Deanne Emory. Thank you for joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on Introduction to Risk Management, the first of a series of 3 webinars on risk management. Please note, we are recording this webinar, so it will be available for viewing in the future. Some logistics before we get started. Due to the high attendance, everyone will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box. We have planned time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions asked. Before I introduce Deanne, I'd like to go over a disclaimer on ANAB's webinars. The content delivered in this webinar is not guaranteed to fully prepare you for any specific application for accreditation. You're responsible for determining the applicability of the information presented to your specific circumstances. Any examples that Deanne may provide today are for illustrative purposes only and are intended to facilitate understanding of the concepts discussed. They're not to be interpreted as required templates, prescriptive models, or representations of compliance with any specific standard. Deanne is the instructional designer for ANAB, where she develops and instructs training courses and assists with recruiting and training of our contract instructors. With over 30 years of experience in quality and quality management in laboratories, petroleum, and manufacturing, Deanne spent the last 10 years as a consultant, independent internal auditor, and assessor. She has extensive standards development experience as an active member of ASTM, and she had a 3-year term on COTCO, the Committee on Technical Committee Operations, and holds the honorary title of Fellow, having received ASTM's Award of Merit in 2009. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Deanne to start the webinar.
Thank you, Melanie. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to talk a little bit about what today's webinar is going to be about. It's not based on any specific certification or accreditation standard, but it's based on ISO 31000, which is entitled Risk Management Guidelines. These guidelines are used to assist organizations in managing risk, setting and achieving objectives, and improving the organization's performance. It is written in such a way that it can be used by organizations of all types and size by looking at both external and internal factors that could have influence on their objectives, their planned improvements, and their decision making. The standard assists organizations in determining any uncertainty involved in achieving their objectives. Risk management is also there to assist organizations in minimizing or mitigating those risks. You need to look at your management system or management systems and standards that you are accredited or certified to in order to make a decision on how you will implement your risk-based thinking requirements. What we're going to discuss today are guidelines. Managing risk is iterative. I'm going to say that over and over for the next 30 minutes or so. It involves repetition or a cyclical process. The organization itself refines risks and opportunities through this repetition and review in order to drive improvement. Managing risk assists organizations in setting strategy, achieving objectives, and making informed decisions. It is part of governance and leadership and is fundamental to how an organization is managed at all levels. It contributes to the improvement of management systems, which is what we are all trying to achieve. Managing risk is part of all activities associated with an organization and includes interaction with stakeholders. It also considers the external and internal context of the organization, including human behavior and cultural factors. So before we move on into the ISO 31000 risk management, let's look at the definitions of some of the terms that we will be using today. As defined in ISO 31000, risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. There are 3 notes to the definition. Note 1 is written on the slide, and it states an effect is a deviation from the expected. It can be positive, negative, or both, and can address, create, or result in opportunities and threats. Note 2 states objectives can be different aspects or categories and can be applied at different levels. Note 3 to the definition says that risk is usually expressed in terms of risk sources, potential events, and their consequences and their likelihood. We will talk more about risk sources, potential events, and the consequences and likelihood in the next 2 webinars on risk assessment. I've also got on this slide the ISO 9000 definition, which is simply written that it is an effect of uncertainty, with a note that states an effect is a deviation from the expected, both positive and negative. So here we have to consider that opportunity is not the positive side of risk. We take risks for potential benefit. Calculated risks are often made by organizations when planning and making improvements. Not every risk is bad, and not every opportunity is good. So think about these considerations as we move through the principles and framework of risk management. So our next definition is actually of risk management. ISO 31000 defines risk management as the coordinated activities to direct and control an organization with regard to risk. The key words are coordinated activities. So think of planned activities. Planning creates the blueprint. Coordination is the execution mechanism for that plan. So that is what risk management is all about. We will also be using the term stakeholder as well. ISO 9000 states a stakeholder is a person or organization that can affect, be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. A note to the definition of stakeholder says the term interested party can be used as an alternative to stakeholder, and I will be using both today. So think about this definition when considering who the stakeholders are in your organization. Who are the interested parties? Remember, stakeholders include those who perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. An example of those who might perceive themselves as affected could be employees who may think a planned restructuring will affect their job security. Adding risk management to the restructuring project allows the organization to identify this stakeholder they might not have considered before and get ahead of and plan for ways to minimize these concerns and allow the change to be implemented more smoothly, perhaps without a potential negative outcome of key personnel leaving because they perceive the issue of job insecurity. Our final definition is context of the organization. This is a combination of internal and external issues that can have an effect on an organization's approach to developing and achieving its objectives. This is a concept introduced in the ISO 9001 standard. It is not required by, for example, ISO 17025, but it is a useful tool in risk-based thinking. It is an in-depth review of a business entity which looks at the structure, strengths, weaknesses, the interested parties, and performance expectations. It is central to creating policies and procedures that return results and drive continual improvement. Understanding the context allows you to see risks coming. In planning, in plainer words, the context of the organization means understanding the total environment in which your organization operates. It includes things you can control, the internal factors, things you cannot control, which are the external factors, and the stakeholders, such as your customers, your employees, your suppliers, and when applicable, any regulators. So now that we are hopefully speaking the same language, in this webinar, we will discuss the principles of risk management. We'll learn a framework for risk management, and we're going to start to understand the process of risk management. Whether your organization is a laboratory, an agency, a manufacturing facility, an inspection body, or other type of organization, the purpose of risk management is the same: the creation and protection of value. Risk management improves performance, encourages innovation, and supports the achievements of the organization's objectives. Value is not necessarily money. It can be so many other things. It can be the organization's reputation, the ability to satisfy customers' needs, and the ability to implement improvements. These are all examples of added value to the organization. And of course, there are many, many others. The principles we're going to discuss on the next slides provide guidance on the characteristics of effective and efficient risk management. It talks about communicating its value and how to explain its intention and purpose. These principles are the foundation of managing risk, and as a best practice, per clause 4 of ISO 31000, should be considered when establishing your organization's risk management framework and processes. These principles should enable an organization to manage the effects of uncertainty on its objectives. Let's look at the principles one by one. Risk management can be used throughout the life of your organization and can be applied to any activity, including decision-making on all levels. Risk management should be an integral part of and integrated into all organizational activities. A structured and comprehensive approach to risk management contributes to consistent and comparable results. For a laboratory, this is one more tool in its arsenal for assuring the validity of their results. For a manufacturing facility, it can assist in assuring minimal rejections and reworks. The risk management framework and the processes should be customized to the organization and proportionate to the organization's external and internal context related to its objectives or goals. So ask yourself, what are the organization's goals? Once these are determined, look internally. Are there resources available to meet these goals? Then look externally. Will there be resistance or hindrances? Or is there assistance to be found outside the organization? When engaging in the process of risk management, it needs to be conducted at all levels and involve all stakeholders so that all views, knowledge, and perception are known and considered. Being inclusive improves awareness and creates a more informed risk management system. To be dynamic, the risk management program needs to respond to events in an appropriate and timely manner. Risks can emerge, they can change or disappear as an organization's External and internal issues change as its context may change. Risk management anticipates, it detects, acknowledges, and responds to those changes and events in an appropriate and timely manner. That time, how it's appropriate, is planned by the organization itself. The inputs to risk management need to be based on historical information, where the organization has been, current information, where it is today, and future expectation, where the organization is going or where it wants to be, which may involve changes to its objectives and its goals. These types of inputs will explicitly take into account any limitations and uncertainties associated with the information and the expectations. Information should be timely, clear, and available to relevant stakeholders. This leads us back to being comprehensive and inclusive. Remember, the best information available is always changing, leading us back to one of the definitions in risk management, that it is iterative. You need to be reviewing it and repeating it periodically. Human behavior and culture significantly influence all aspects of risk management at each level and at each stage of planning. Here, we should be able to see how important it is to look both internally and externally. For example, we know our internal culture, but what about our customers? Do we need to be aware of differences between our cultures? Considering human and cultural factors has a potential of minimizing cultural faux pas when working with external stakeholders. This can be very important when creating new relationships, making new improvements, which may mean new products or services, maybe new customers coming in, working with new vendors. We think about the human behavior and the culture. If we think about it as we're doing the planning, again, instituting these changes, creating these relationships will work more smoothly. And finally, risk management will lead to organizational continual improvement. However, risk management in itself is also continually improving through review, learning, and experience by the organization. Remember, one last time, risk management is iterative. You have to be reviewing and learning from your experience. The best information available is always changing. This should be exciting. This should be exciting to any organization. As we move through the process of risk management, as the program itself improves through learning and experience, if implemented properly at all levels, the organization will achieve continual improvement, which may include such things as fewer fallouts, less non-conforming work, lower turnover of personnel, and greater customer satisfaction. So keeping these principles in mind, let's start building a framework for risk management. A complete risk management framework will assist an organization in integrating risk management into their significant activities and functions. The effectiveness of the risk management will depend on its integration into the governance of the organization, including decision-making. This requires support from all interested parties, all stakeholders, particularly your top management. The organization should evaluate its existing management practices, risk management practices, and processes, and evaluate any gaps and address those gaps within the framework shown on this slide. These components of leadership and commitment, design, implementation, evaluation, improvement, and integration, and the way they work together should be customized to meet the needs of the organization. So let's look at this more deeply. Top management, and where applicable, any oversight bodies should ensure that risk management is integrated into all organizational activities and should demonstrate leadership and commitment by customizing and implementing all components of the framework, issuing a statement or policy that establishes a risk management approach, plan, or course of action, ensuring the necessary resources are allocated to managing risk, and assigning authority, responsibility, and accountability at appropriate levels within the organization. So here we see that top management needs to be an integral part of the leadership and commitment of the risk management program. For many of you, those of you who are accredited or certified to one of the standards, you may be thinking, this sounds a little bit about what we do in management review. And you would probably be right. For example, in ISO 17025 and ISO 17043, the requirement to review the results of risk identification is one of the inputs to the management review. Top management has to be involved in the discussion of the results of risk identification. So some of this framework is built into the requirements of the standards that organizations like you are accredited to or certified to. But all of what we are discussing today are guidelines and best practices to reach the requirements to the standards that you are accredited or certified to. Leadership and commitment will help the organization to achieve these goals. So let's look at some of the benefits of this framework. It will align risk management with its objectives, strategy, and culture. Will recognize and address all obligations as well as its voluntary commitments. So think about where your organization has voluntary commitments. Do you get involved with an SDO? What are those risks? Do you get involved in other trade organizations? What are those risks? What are the benefits, etc.? Leadership and commitment will help the organization to establish the amount and type of risk that may or may not be taken, to guide the development of risk criteria, ensuring that they are communicated to the organization and its stakeholders. That we're going to talk about more during risk assessment in the next 2 webinars. But here we see that the organization itself decides what level or levels of risk are acceptable. Leadership and commitment will also help the organization to communicate the value of risk management to its stakeholders and to the organization in general. And it will promote a systematic monitoring of risks. Finally, it will ensure that the risk management framework remains appropriate to the context of the organization. So now let's think back to the definition of context of the organization. We need to be looking both at internal issues and external issues. Think about how these issues are always changing. Creating this framework is not a do it the project and put it away. It is not one and done. It needs to be planned. It needs to be repeated, reviewed, refined, And most importantly, it needs to be used by the organization in order to be effective. These are living, breathing guidelines. These are going to be part of your policies and procedures if your organization adopts a full risk management program. So let's just review a little bit. The principles of risk management are put into place for an organization's value creation and protection. It must be integrated, structured, comprehensive, customized to the organization's needs, inclusive of all interested parties, both internal and external. It needs to be dynamic. It needs to use the best available information and consider human and cultural factors. This will drive both the improvement to the organization and, as it's reviewed, the improvement of the risk management program itself. A complete risk management framework assists the organization in integrating risk management into significant activities and functions throughout the organization. This framework is a valuable resource for any organization planning or reviewing their risk management program. The plan should, as a best practice, be established and communicated before moving to risk assessment activities. The plan should be there. With that said, the program, this plan, must be able to grow and improve and change as the organization grows, improves, changes. So as its context or its objectives change. You can see, for maximum effectiveness, the risk management program needs to be an integral part of the governance and culture of the organization. This needs to be part of the whole organization. So let's briefly look at the risk management process. We're going to be discussing this process during the risk assessment webinars in March. The risk management process involves the systematic application of policies, procedures, and practices to the activities of communicating, consulting, establishing the context, and assessing, treating, monitoring, reviewing, recording, and reporting risk. This is what we're going to be doing in March. We are going to be looking at ways to assess and identify our risk. We're going to be looking at tools to analyze risk, and then how to evaluate and treat that risk. Before we finish with the presentation today, I want to remind all of you that ISO 31000 gives guidelines for best practices on risk management. I hope you all see how, if integrated into your systems throughout the organization, it will assist you in achieving your objectives and goals. However, it is not in itself a requirement. So if we specifically look at ISO 17025, there's a note in the risk section of the standard 8.5.2, which, of course, a note is not accessible. It is there to assist implementation. It states, although this document specifies that the laboratory plans actions to address risks, there is no requirement for formal methods of risk management or documented risk management process. Laboratories can decide whether or not to develop a more extensive risk management methodology than is required by this document. For example, through the application of other guidelines and standards. All of what we've been talking about today are considered best practices. These will help you push through improvements in your organization. I hope this was an introduction. This shows what all of risk management looks like. I hope that you will join us in March, where we will address specific activities for risk assessment. On March 19th, we're going to talk about the identification and analysis. We're going to talk about tools and how we can do that. And on March 26th, we're going to discuss understanding risk assessment, how to evaluate and mitigate our risks. I hope that I will be seeing you then. I'm looking forward to it. And Melanie, I am going to turn the webinar back over to you for a minute.
Great. Thank you, Deanne. That was a really great presentation. We've had a couple questions come through. We'll get to those after we discuss some additional resources that are available to you from ANAB, and this will give you the opportunity to enter any questions you may have into the Q&A box. ANAB has many different media to further your understanding of standards, accreditation, management systems, and assessments. On the ANAB website, we have free webcasts that are on a variety of different topics that are from about 5 to 20 minutes long, depending on the topic, and you can view them at any time. We also have a blog page with a wealth of information related to accreditation, standard requirements, this topic of risk here, and others. We also do these webinars monthly, as Deanne said. We actually have 2 planned for March, and we are planning into April and May as well. So keep an eye out on the ANAB website for future webinars. And you can already sign up for the March webinars for the remaining 2 of this series right now. We also offer training. Since the pandemic, our training is now all live online. For the most part, unless tied to a conference, but our training is on a variety of different topics as well. We offer instructor-led. We also have web-based, self-paced training. All of these resources can be found on the ANAB website at anab.ansi.org. And now we will get to your questions. Deanne, the first question that came in is, can you show slide 12 again?
I can show slide 12 again. This is talking about it being an integrated, it should be an integral part of your organization. It has to be integrated into all of your organization activities. Okay.
The
There's
next
no other
question.
Okay.
Should risk be expressed as a value such as low, medium, or high?
It can be. A lot of how we are going to assess our risk is dependent on what the business is doing and the context of the company. So it can be low, medium, and high. That's why it talks about how risk is very often expressed in terms of consequences and likelihood. And the next webinar that we give, we're going to talk about maybe creating matrices and how we can assess what items of risk we want to deal with first by grading them. So yeah, that is a way of doing it, and we're going to be talking about that a lot when we talk about the risk assessment part of these webinars.
Excellent. Someone asked about getting a copy of the standard. The standard can be bought from the ANSI web store. It is a purchasable standard. Then our next question for you, Deanne. For a laboratory that is accredited to 17025 and has undergone a restructuring process, specifically by reducing the middle management layer, what actions should the organization take to demonstrate to the assessor that the associated risks have been properly identified, evaluated, and managed?
I am assuming that the risks were properly identified, evaluated, and managed before you did the restructuring process. There had to have been a plan. If you implemented such a large plan, I would think that you had written notes either from the meetings or in management review. Those will show the assessor that you have looked at and considered your risks in those restructurings. I have a personal um, bias to not necessarily create documentation specifically for an assessor, but I will tell you that you might want to, as a best practice, create that documentation, not for an assessor, not because you're accredited, but because this decision was made by people in 2025. And in 2035, there may be different people in your organization who will suddenly think, we might need a bigger middle management layer, and they will have that record of why you reduced that layer. So do it because it will help your organization, not so much because you want an assessor to be happy, she says from the assessment body. I hope that answers this question.
All right, the next question, can you give an example of a positive risk?
I guess I'm better at a negative opportunity. But a positive risk would be a risk you would be willing to take for an improvement. Here's an example. You have a customer that wants you to add something to your scope of accreditation because it's important, and this is a big customer. Now you have to hire personnel. You have to validate and verify that you can do these methods. You may have to rearrange part of your laboratory. There is a risk associated to doing that. How are these changes going to change the flow of other customers' work going through your laboratory? This is a risk that you need to take. This is a positive type of risk that you are going to accept because of the opportunity that it will bring.
The next question, can you show slide 14?
I suppose so. Oops, that didn't work. Worked the first time. There we go. This has to be customized, and that customization needs to be proportionate to the external internal issues of the objectives of the company.
Great. Then the next question, it's mandatory to identify risks to the testing or technical issues in a lab with a question mark, or can you only identify, for example, strategic communication on corporate related risks and you're still compliant with 17025?
Is it mandatory to identify risks to the testing and technical issues in the lab?
So I think they're saying do we have to have risks for all of the organization, or can it just be strategic?
Your risk assessment is got to be as thorough as you need it to be. If this is something you're just starting out to do, try to identify the important risks to your company or to your laboratory or to what you're doing. There is the requirement for risk assessment in 17025 is very vague because you need to do your own risk identification. What I might find as a risk in my lab is very different from yours. And the reason that I kept saying that this is iterative is that you're going to look at your risks. And then there are requirements in 17025, for example, after doing working with your nonconformances and doing your corrective action, you've got to go back and look at the risks you identified. Well, did you not anticipate this risk? Okay, maybe it was not on your risk assessment, your first look. Well, now you may want to add this and then look, are there similar risks? So it will evolve with your knowledge. I hope that helps.
All right, the next question, 17025 suggests the lab does its own risk identification. Can assessors cite other possible risks during an assessment?
I hesitate to say yes or no. Um, in their best knowledge, an assessor may talk about other possible risks. I'm not sure if you're asking if they would give a finding or not. Some of that depends on the accreditation body you're working with. If the accreditation body writes opportunities for improvement. But what I am saying to the labs is that your first risk assessment is your best look at what your risks are. And as your management system matures and you go back and you review them during management review, you look at them after corrective action, you look at them periodically, for example, your risks to impartiality. This assessment is going to become more and more valuable. It may grow and it will become more meaningful. And that is what an accreditation body is going to look for. We are always looking for your continual improvement.
All right, we did have one question on an Office of Management and Budget document from the government. It's outside the scope of this webinar and doesn't pertain to the information presented. So we'll leave that one in our pending. I don't see
Okay.
any other questions. Deanne, if you want to go to our last slide for contact information.
Sure, I have to go find it. There we go.
So here's additional contact information for ANAB. If you have questions about training that we offer, you can email training@anab.org. If you have any other questions about this topic or about the accreditation services that ANAB provides, you can email anab@anab.org. I want to thank Deanne for presenting today, as well as for presenting for our future webinars in March. Thank you everyone for coming and have a great day.
Thank you.